Hello and welcome back to Mets Daily. I'm your host, Jake Brown, at Jake Brown Live. You can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, X, and subscribe to my YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Mets Daily YouTube and hit that thumbs up. Smash that thumbs up. There it is. Right below, and comment below. Let us know what you think of the playoffs so far and your offseason predictions. And let me know what you think of this. My goodness. You could see a little bit more of the face fat. Trim the beard, job interview, wanted to look a little bit better, a little bit less homeless um, with with the full beard. So we trimmed it. It will grow back, don't worry. But yes, I do look like the boss baby. I almost shaved the whole thing. I came very close, but I was like, I got to keep something. But yeah, it is not the most appealing look. But listen, maybe a couple of years off. Maybe I'm back to 25-year-old instead of 34-year-old. Starling Marte is a 36-year-old, and he's a topic of conversation because The Athletic did a good story about him and what he meant to the Mets. And remember, Juan Soto called Starling Marte the de facto captain of the team, and everyone was like, oh, is that a slight to Francisco Lindor? Everyone talked very highly of Starling Marte, but the reality is he was on the last year of a 4-year deal. When the Mets gave him that deal, and Billy Epler gave him that deal, it made a lot of sense. Starling Marte was still in, somewhat of his prime, probably in the back end of the prime of his career, but the reality is he wasn't tradable. You had to keep him because of the money that was owed to him. And that's the only reason he was really on this team. He was under contract. There's nothing you could do with that contract. Marte was in year 4 of a $78 million deal. It was 15.75, 20.75, 20.75, and this year 20.75. He'll be 37 next year. He's not going to get anywhere close to $20 million on the open market. But, as much as he was liked by Juan Soto, and as much as I think we all like Starling Marte, the reality is, what does he do for this team? He's really a part-time DH. He's not an outfielder. He doesn't have the speed that he used to have. He's a good guy to have on the team, but not as a player. Like, if you want to bring this guy in as like a coaching assistant, fine, and we'll talk about the Mets coaching staff and who might stay and who might go in just a little bit on the show as we kind of wait to hear the revealing of who's getting fired and who's not. I would expect we hear by Monday. But Starling Marte, as each day and each week we'll talk about Mets free agents, who they should keep, who they should go. We'll obviously talk about Pete. Marte's a guy I just don't see any reason to bring him back. He wasn't dreadful this year. He had 279, 335 on base in 98 games. He had 293 at-bats, 9 homers, 34 RBIs, just 7 stolen bases, which is a career low for him. He's, at his age, he's just not that guy who's going to steal for you anymore. He turns 37 next week, October 9th. So with his sprint speed down, with his power down, with his hitting down, he hit into a bunch of double plays this year and had a bunch of just missed opportunities when the Mets needed him most. And as a veteran who gets playing time, who played 98 games, you really wanted more from Starling Marte. You didn't get it. Remember, he got off to that terrible start, and then he got hot, but just a bunch of singles. I think he's now just a singles hitter, and if a singles hitter is not stealing me bags, what's the point? I just don't get the point of keeping Starling Marte around. 79 hits, 14 doubles. He had 0 triples, which has never happened in his career, and 9 home runs. So 23 of his 79 hits were for extra bases. If you do the math, 23, 79, minus 23, off the top of my head, that's 56. He had 56 singles. He was a glorified singles hitter, and I just see no place for Starling Marte to just keep him around to appeal to Juan Soto. It just doesn't make sense. So, listen, if he comes back for a 1-year, $2 million deal, fine. But I just see no world where the Mets need Starling Marte, nor should they want him. Enough of the fun guys and guys that your star player likes. You need to build out the best roster possible. And what you saw flawed the Mets this year, 1-26, they had flaws. They had position holes. They had guys who weren't good enough to fill in. They didn't have consistency. Obviously, they didn't have innings from starters. But enough of these part-time DHs. The Mets got to focus on having a real DH next season and not this guy's going to play this guy day. This guy is going to play this day. You got to have locked-in guys, and Marte's just not a guy you feel comfortable playing. So I'm moving on from Starling Marte. Let us know in the comments below. Do you have interest in bringing Marte back? I think he had a good Mets career, fun career. It's a deal that Billy Epler did. It's a deal that David Stearns would never do for Starling Marte. But at the time, I understand doing the deal. The Mets, Starling Marte, a part of the reason the Mets didn't make the playoffs, a lot with other people, and the Reds getting in. And, the Dodgers took quick care of business, taking care of business over the Cincinnati Reds, who lost game 2. They lose 2-0. 8-4 last night, 10-5 in game 1. That is 18-9. They doubled them up in runs, absolutely destroying the Cincinnati Reds, who 40-40 in the last 80. It's not like the Reds did anything to deserve to get in. It's the Mets really that handed them a playoff spot. Do you guys think the Mets would have stood a chance against the Dodgers? I think the Mets were a better team than the Reds, and the Mets did this to themselves. But you wonder if the Mets were to have got in and go to L.A., did they stand any chance? Now, Yamamoto wasn't dominant last night. Blake Snell was pretty dominant for the first 5 or 6 innings, then he struggled. But the reality is both those pitchers gave up, 2-3 runs, and their offense just went crazy. Could the Mets pitching staff have contained that Dodgers lineup? It doesn't feel like it. Now, with that being said, I still would have liked to see them get in because it's baseball. You just never know. We can't say, because the Dodgers destroyed the Reds, the Mets would have stood no chance. I don't think that's true either. So let us know in the comments below, would the Mets have competed against the Dodgers? Would there be a game 3 in LA between the Mets and Dodgers today? The Reds, good for them making the playoffs, but my God, that was quick. The Yankees, Red Sox has been incredible. That's going to a game 3. Tigers, Guardians has been fun. That's game 3. Same for Padres, Cubs. That's game 3. So 3 out of 4 series going to a game 3. That's good for baseball. Good to see. The one series, obviously, Dodgers were just too good. One guy who won't be part of the coaching staff anymore is Glenn Sherlock, the Mets catching instructor. He has decided to retire. He had enough after dealing with this Mets team. So as we continue to await the coaching staff decisions, we wonder who stays and who goes. And, let's take a look at my predictions of who I think stays and who goes. And now, this is just what I think of what I saw this year, what I think needs to be shaken up. And, I assume by Monday we have an answer. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe over the weekend. My guess is Monday, but when this show comes out, we might have answers. We have an answer on Sherlock already, so you see that at the bottom of the screen. Mendoza, we already know, is staying. Everyone else, we have no idea yet if they're staying and going. Let's start with Jeremy Hefner. Now, the vaunted pitching lab was a big topic of discussion for the Mets and, how good the pitching was last year and reforming relievers into starters and having guys have career seasons. I think that took a hit this year. Guys did not go deep into games. They weren't effective as they were last year. Sean Manaea really struggled, who, by the way, might avoid offseason surgery on his elbow, which we thought was a lock, but they may say he may avoid it, so we'll see what happens with Manaea. I think the organization really likes Hefner, and they view him as a tremendous asset. So that's why I think Jeremy Hefner is going to be one of the guys that stays here. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree. Some might agree with that. I just think, what I know, the organization really likes him. I think he ends up staying. I think you have to fire the hitting coaches. Eric Chavez, Jeremy Barnes, get rid of them. Eric Chavez was more focused posting on Instagram stories, his haters, and no one condones the messages that he was getting from fans, but no one also condones him fighting the fans back on his Instagram. I mean, stop. You're never going to win when it's you against the fans, especially with how bad of a job you did. The hitting approach was terrible this year. It's obviously on the players first, but as coaches, you get a lot of blame. And Eric Chavez has not really been a likable guy since he became the Mets hitting coach. Just a lot of chirping and not a lot of results. So I would get rid of him and Barnes, start fresh. Obviously, Carlos Beltran, JD Martinez are the two names we've all said and thought about. Who knows if they even want to do that? Does Beltran want to leave a front office role to travel with the team every day? Who knows? I'm sure he's enjoying the cushy role, 6-figure salary, to not do that much work. So he may not even want that job, but I think the hitting coaches are gone. John Gibbons, bench coach you just never really talk about. I just think the Mets got to get younger at bench coach. Gibbons is not a bad coach, but I'd like to see the Mets get maybe someone with experience, but a little bit younger. Gibbons on the back end of his career. We'll see how many years he has left coaching. Maybe someone younger, a little bit more fire as your bench coach. Maybe Carlos Beltran ends up being the bench coach, or JD Martinez. Maybe that's guy. Maybe Starling Marte. I don't know, but I would just like to get a little bit younger at bench coach. First base coach, I think you got to keep Antoine Richardson. Everyone raved about him. The Mets were stealing bases at a record pace. They never got thrown out. So Richardson's got to stay. Mike Sarba, I think you fire simply for the fact that he did not send Tyrone Taylor home against the Guardians. I mean, that will forever live in my head for me, for Mike Sarba. I don't think he had a really good year. There were multiple times where he didn't send a guy, or he sent a guy who was out by a mile. And obviously, third base coach gets a lot more slack than the other coaches, because it could be one play like that ruins your philosophy or thoughts about them. But I think it's just the Mets are better off firing Mike Sarba. No one really said, oh, Mike does a great job. Everyone said Antoine does. No one was like, oh, Mike's doing a great job at third base. I would move on from him. If you're keeping Jeremy Hefner, I think you got to get rid of one of the hitting coaches. Desi Drechel, I would fire. Maybe get a different assistant pitching coach. That's just me thinking, if you're keeping one, get rid of the other. Strategy coach, the strategies weren't good for the Mets this year. They didn't bunt enough. They didn't play enough small ball. They try to do the same thing over and over till you're blue in the face. So I don't know if that's on Danny Barnes, but their strategy sucked. Whatever the strategy was, it was piss poor. So I would get rid of Danny Barnes, and then Glenn Sherlock at the bottom we think's get fired. Now, you never root for people to get fired, but heads will roll when a team does what the Mets did in 2025 and has the collapse that they did. If you don't want to call it a collapse, whatever, a downfall, a downturn, a disaster, a debacle, the debacle of the second half 2025 Mets. After 69 games, they were great. And then after the 69, they were brutal. So I think coaches got to go. I'm Jake Brown, at Jake Brown Live. Smash that thumbs up. Let us know in the comments if you agree. Which coaches should stay, which should go. Let us know in the comments below. We'll read the comments on tomorrow's show. Scan that code to become a Mets Daily Insider for just $5 a month. Cheaper than a cup of coffee. And we're live streaming all over on my YouTube and my TikTok at Jake Brown Live. So follow along if you're into postseason baseball. It's obviously tough for us to watch. It's Mets fans for Red Sox right now tonight, at least for one more game. And let's see if they take down the Yankees. Thanks for watching, everybody. And we will talk to you tomorrow right here on Mets Daily.